Okay. So first kind of question I have, and then I'll go into some data, but just how do you think things are going so far this year in your guys' market?
I'll say we did a good job at getting reservations in earlier. We're definitely seeing a pacing down in the last 2 months, especially with when the economy went kind of crazy. But we're still pacing ahead, and we are looking into a positive summer.
Awesome. So for you, market seems to be under a little pressure, but you guys got some early bookings, or like you have been driving early bookings to keep you kind of ahead in pace.
Yeah, correct. We were able to identify some slow months pacings, and then we were able to switch our strategy to target those lower demands area. And I think we did a really good job um, to get ahead of that.
Awesome.
We
Um,
just, oh, sorry.
no, you go ahead.
We have a lot of repeat guests that come year after year, and so we did a good job as well with early bookings, but we've definitely seen a slower summer for sure. So I think what I've seen with what you've sent out before, and the sort of data before this call, we're feeling that for sure. It's certainly slower than it was last summer. But we do have a good amount of repeat guests that come. So the early bookings were really what filled our calendar. But we're seeing, shorter bookings that are booked in a shorter amount of time, like quicker than they used to be. So, we might have a few 3 or 4 day booking that comes in the week before, which wasn't the case previously. So, we are getting some sort of gap bookings in, but we're certainly down from previous years for sure.
Definitely, yeah, that makes sense. Kind of interesting. There's
Aspen.
kind of like I've heard this from a lot of people, but there's kind of like well, I guess I've heard it in different ways. Like short-term window seems to be a lot stronger, but it has to make up for kind of a lack of pace in other places.
Right.
Yes, definitely staying shorter stays, and a lot of professional revenue managers over the last year have talked about the missing middle. That kind of like this will change depending on how big your properties are, but like that 60-day kind of window, 60 to 90-day window is just like not pacing the way it used to. That used to be like a prime window, and now it's kind of like a lull. Um, what's kind of unknown, like obviously that'll be further out if you're big, shorter in if you're really small properties, but um, I think the big unknown is like how much of that is actually driven by price, right? Uh, and how much of it is true consumer behavioral change. I'm not sure. We'll look into that. Maybe we'll see. But a little bit of pressure, a lot of repeat guests. One quick question before we move on there is where do you guys' guests mostly come from? Like where your source markets are?
It's definitely domestic. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Do you see that shift a little bit in the winter?
Yes. Slightly, not a lot, but we have, again, for us, we do have a lot of repeat guests. We're a very small property. And so we have, people that have been coming from Australia year after year. So we do have a few international clients, but for the most part, it's for sure domestic. And certainly in the summer, I think it's very rare that we have international
Yep.
clients in the summer.
That's what I would expect.
Same
Um,
for us.
sorry, what was that, Gina?
I just say same for us.
Perfect. Okay. Well, let's hop into some data here. I'll hit this at the end. We've already started. Oh, whoops. Hold on. Sorry, I'm trying to. Oh, let's get out of that. There we go.
Your art behind you is so cool, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you.
Yeah.
I studied painting for over 6 years in college, so they're mine.
Heck yeah. Super cool. Very
Yeah.
talented.
Yeah, I don't know how it makes me a good analyst, but there's some connection there.
For sure.
Okay.
Does
So,
make you a living, however.
yeah, it's easier to make. Yeah, definitely
That's
true.
Wayne in the background chiming in from time to time, the GM for Lift One. So
Yeah. I made a lot of money when I was young, like relative to the kind of money you can make when you're young, but it's really hard to hustle that way all the time.
for sure, not consistent.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll hop into the Wheelhouse data first, but one of the things I did want to pull up, I do like to just poke around and find other data. Not from Wheelhouse. I know that sounds a little weird, but the reason is there's actually often a lot of very good data available, and I think it's really helpful to have multiple data sources that say things when you're talking to like owners or maybe your executive team, right? Because, you know, some people will trust you, some people won't, but if you can say it from different sources, usually it'll come through. And the oops, sorry, a second. The Aspen chamber actually has some pretty interesting data availability. They do post a number of things, and I pulled up a few things here. One of them is like these occupancy and retail reports are pretty interesting. And so is this month at a glance. And these can be really helpful for just kind of getting a snapshot. Now they're going to trail a little bit as most kind of like chamber or government data or DMO data does, but they stay pretty up to date, it seems like. So the first one I just pulled up is they have this pretty interesting kind of sentiment analysis about what people are feeling in the area about tourism. I'm not going to sit on this one very long. You can kind of see it. I do think it's relevant to bring up because we see a lot of areas kind of, you know, under a lot of pressure in our space for the expansion of the kind of product that we have. Um, and the short one here is like there's just a few tidbits that over quality of life has improved. People do think that there's a strong value of the tourism industry here among both residents and non-residents. And there was a little bit of a mismatch here where even though people say it contributes pretty strongly, it had fallen over the last few years, like, you know, there's a slight negative about like that people were seeing it was impacted. It didn't seem as bad as a lot of areas I've seen. It actually was generally pretty good in terms of like how the chamber sees it. But this is kind of useful to just see how people um actually view the industry in the area, something really important to keep an eye on as we see regulation, stuff like that. This one's less revenue management. I was just going to pull it up because I thought it was interesting. The ones that are more revenue management are, they will straight up give you some top level, uh, I think this is more hotel oriented data. But this is May, as of the end of May. You can just see what's kind of going on in Aspen and Snowmass from the hotel side. A little bit of a difference in performance between the two. And I liked this one here where they're telling us at the end of May how the pacing was, the occupancy pacing was for the upcoming summer. So the rest of the summer, right? And so down a little bit on the hotel side. I looked at a couple of the other months here because they post this for every month. Pretty up and down, honestly, through the spring. Like some things were pacing ahead, some things were pacing behind. Occupancy would be like up a little bit and sometimes down a little bit. But as of May, um, occupancy's up a bit, ADR is down quite a bit on the hotel side, um, and future summer pacing is behind slightly. So the last one here, which I think is probably the most useful for just kind of checking up on and seeing what's going on across the entirety of the market area, and also maybe has some slides that are helpful to send to an owner if you're trying to talk to them about what's going on, is this executive summary. That one can be found here. I think it's this month at a glance. And it just does a pretty good job of giving you strong data points that can come directly from the chamber, right? Demand's been falling, a lot less room nights sold, but supply is down actually, which is pretty interesting. So that's actually making occupancy look better. But actually what that means is supply is down quite a bit. Or sorry, demand is down quite a bit because this year over year difference in occupancy is really the difference in supply is taking care of the fact that there's a significant amount of fewer room nights sold. These receipts for short-term rentals are down way more than the hotel side. So if we look at this, short-term rental receipts, this is for April, so this is a little farther back, but down pretty substantially. And I think that those are pretty interesting because there is a difference between like the different products, right? Let's see here.
Wait, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Something that we saw in Aspen and even more so in Snowmass was more owner stays. So when you're saying like the tax receipts were down, that makes sense because owner stays were up. So that was one of the trends that we saw this winter.
That makes a ton of sense. I wonder too, like this one I didn't get a chance to dig too deep into like all the different sources of their data. I usually try to find that, but they don't make it super obvious on this chart. Like these charts, like what their different data sources are. I wonder if that's actually contributing to the supply portion. Because a lot of these people get data from a few sources. They get it from AirDNA, they get it from key data, stuff like that. And sometimes they'll combine those things. Now, they don't tell us, they don't give us a little footnote here to tell us like this is just from this data source or whatnot. But that can make a ton of sense in terms of the actual supply being down as well. My big concern here, though, is just this: fewer room nights sold, right? That is a quantifiable drop in demand. They do mention that somewhere nearby that booking pace declined for 6 months, longest streak since the onset of COVID. So this is pretty useful. I'll send it to you guys after. I'm not going to keep digging into it. We'll just dig into some of the data now. But I think I like to bring these up because one, they validate some of the things we're kind of seeing. Potentially, they give us a little different perspective when we look at both hotels and just a couple slices. And it's also great to be able to pull this stuff when you're talking to people because it's, from a source people will at least understand or trust. This is from the chamber. Well, maybe trust. I assume they'll trust him.
I
Awesome.
can say the same thing for us super quick too, that we have had more owner stays, longer owner stays. We've had some turnovers in property that some of the new owners are using it much more of a vacation spot than a pure rental income property that some of the previous owners were using their units for. And then we had a couple owners drop out of the rental program that used to be renters. And so certainly I can speak on this sort of the same thing that Molly was saying, that we've had higher owner use for sure. And then fewer rooms available because we have some owners that are out of the rental pool. So we're a 31 unit complex and right now we have 25 in the rental program, but there used to be a few more. So it does make a difference. But yeah, so just wanted to chime in on that too.
That's really interesting too. If that's a trend you're all kind of seeing where people are using the properties more, people are not using it as a commercial property. I wonder if that actually contributes to what I think is actually a pretty high sentiment for the industry here compared to some other markets I've seen that do report this data. Like this generally seems like good news, the way they're talking about the way the community views the industry. And that's a lot different than what you hear about. Like, I don't know, you guys are on the ground. Maybe that's not the case, but I thought that obviously there's a impression that the chamber wants to put forward here, but it does seem like it's generally more positive than I see or I hear about in a lot of areas when they do this kind of like sentiment stuff. Do you have regulation coming down the pipe at all, or how do you feel things are kind of look there from that perspective?
As far as owner usage,
And just like also restriction on rental and like regulation on the industry at large.
I can say that for Aspen and Snowmass, yes, there is more regulation being discussed. And we went, Janae and I went to a seminar that Streamline, I think, sponsored. I can't remember the parent company who Streamline sponsored. And there was a gentleman there who told us, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually coming through. But he said it's only going to get harder and harder to be in the STR business. because of the regulation. So Aspen right now is lobbying, I think. Oh, yeah, to remove a cap. So it used to be that there was a certain amount of STRs that could be in a certain just say a region within this town of Aspen. And I think they're gonna increase the cap because the number of STRs that they thought people were applying for is actually much less than they thought. So I guess that's not really regulation, but STRs, I guess, are still being discussed. And then in Snowmass, I think, yes, they are trying to potentially add another tax or something. And it's up for debate, but everything's still in discussion. Nothing has been implemented or confirmed yet.
Yeah. It's interesting because like, in a way, like for businesses, it's hard when owners are using all their nights. But there is kind of like a hidden benefit there too, which I think it makes it might contribute to the fact that overall sentiment is actually pretty good in this market on the tourism industry and the STR stuff. I wonder if there's a link there, but that's just me opining on it. Let's take a look at some of this Wheelhouse data. So let me grab my little pen thing if I can find it. You can see this if I draw
Yes.
screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is Wheelhouse Market Report. Wheelhouse Market Reports are pretty cool. They're like kind of a very high level look into trend data. I think they're very useful for kind of getting some simple ideas of what's going on in the market area. We do have data tools that'll allow you to drill into much smaller kind of like submarkets or neighborhoods. But for this one, we're just going to kind of look at the big picture. One thing to point out here is market reports in Wheelhouse are actually free for everyone. So whether you're a Wheelhouse user or not, you can log into Wheelhouse and just access these for any market in the world. So if you're ever looking for some additional data sources or want to see what's going on, you can access this data. One of the things we're going to dig into those trends, kind of like what I was showing on the video. I noticed that a couple of you guys watched it. A lot of people don't. When I'm on these calls, it's kind of funny. But just a few highlights here. Main one that I like on this screen is just kind of listings are down. So this isn't necessarily units, it is listings. But we are seeing a reduction from attrition of those listings year over year. That does match kind of what was said in some of this executive summary, and also kind of matches what you're saying as well, which is like these total room nights are kind of off the program. People are using their platform more. There's less stuff. Now, I'm going to go back to this trend section because I do think this is the best place to kind of just get a basic viewpoint of what's going on. I almost always suggest you use occupancy, especially when you're talking to owners and things like that. The main reason is occupancy is something that I think most people can read and understand and kind of internalize. And it gives you an idea of just like what's going on. You know, we know that the ADR component is another component for everyone in this industry, but just having a conversation, kind of looking at the occupancy, you can get an idea of like where the market's going, what's kind of happening. And I think that from a revenue management perspective, I kind of suggest you do something like high level every season. You want to have an idea of how you think the market is doing in the future and what trends are coming down the pipe, because that's going to influence your behavior, right? The simple example is if you think things are going to get worse, you're going to be more conservative about the rate position you put out. You're going to try to pace ahead. If you think things are going to get way better, you're not going to be very concerned about pacing. You're going to be willing to take more risk to get a higher rate, things like that. And so from a revenue management practice side, I always suggest that like on a quarterly basis, just kind of look out and ask the question, how do I think next season's going to go? How do I think the following season's going to go? How do I think this year is going to shape up? From a more like just overall like kind of macro perspective, both in the market and in the economy at large, it'll help you kind of determine the pricing behavior that you're going to take. In general here, you guys know your seasonality. Strong high season, pretty strong summer as well. We will see that There is some difference here in the overall RevPAR though. So what that means is even though the occupancies are pretty high, the winter is going to have a little bit more stable, higher rate, although July does kind of hit pretty close to that peak. And even though occupancies kind of build up in June and August, they're not quite as high on the rate side, so you get a lower RevPAR. So from a seasonality perspective, Q1 is the main top season. July is pretty close, and then these are also pretty strong. But probably like we talked about earlier, quite a different customer profile. Probably very different booking windows. Winter looked pretty good here. Strong January from an occupancy perspective. Pretty stable in February. March dropped a little bit. Part of that might be the late Easter. Part of it obviously is weather dependent. Don't see much of that getting made up in April and May as we get into the kind of mud season months. That's down. And June ended up quite a bit down from an occupancy perspective. Now, keep in mind, this is the market level. So when you're looking at this, you guys are kind of professional, like obviously professional managers. So you probably would expect higher numbers than this, and you may not see the same trends, but you always want to be kind of comparing what your own pacing and your own trends look like to what you see at the market level. Because from the consumer's perspective, a down market means there's a lot more choice. It also might mean that the market itself is pretty unoptimized to the consumer. Now, the big question right now is, where are the pacing for these summer months kind of happening? Like, where are we? So I pulled this data up. It's not directly obvious on this screen right now, but let me move off my pen. So July right now, we're a little over halfway to where the market ended last year. With less than 30 days left in the market, that seems a little low to me. Last year at this time for July, the market was about 43% occupancy. So it's trailing. Trailing by a pretty decent margin as well. For August, it was at about 20% occupancy at this time. So that's only trailing a little bit, not quite as bad, but still trailing. And then for September, which we're starting to kind of fall off into the low season, we were only about 8%, so that's trailing quite a bit, but that 8% is pretty low in general. So looking forward, the market is pacing behind pretty much across the board, and that trend of kind of like falling short that we've probably seen here is probably likely, because you can see April, May, June, those areas that trail behind never really made up the same level at the market level. That kind of fits with what we looked at here on this. Just gross demand is down. And in terms of like pricing strategy, what are the main things you guys are doing to kind of respond to this? Like both, I think most of you guys have said that have been able to pace pretty well because you made a lot of early bookings and you really have focused on that. In terms of competing in the short term, what is it that you guys are doing?
We've been running some specials, and not all of our unit owners participate in discounts, and so that makes it a little more challenging for us too. But we have been running specials, and we kept our rates kind of foreseeing after the winter months. We kept the rates for the summer stable to begin with. In comparison to last summer, we didn't really increase rates, just kind of foreseeing what was potentially going to happen. So those are a couple things that we've done.
Do you have what I ordered original?
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. How far out are you generally looking? Like, when did you decide to keep the rates pretty stable? Did you make that decision year over year? Or did you make that decision like after the winter? You were like, we're going to keep the rate stable for summer?
Sorry, my coworker's on the phone. It's a little difficult right now for me.
Oh,
Hang on
sorry.
just a second. I might
You're
let
good.
someone else chime in, and then I'll chime back in a second. Hold on.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're good. Okay, sorry. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Oh, well, you mentioned you were planning to keep your rates stable in the summer. when did you kind of make that decision? Did you do that like year over year? Where like last summer you're like, hey, next year we're just going to be a little more conservative and keep rates stable? Did you do it after the winter? Basically,
During
how far are you looking out?
during the winter. And so it was a little bit of an interesting situation last summer. We, long story that I won't bore anybody with, but we have always done rack rate pricing. But last summer we had a board member who introduced dynamic pricing, which did not work at all for us because again, we have a lot of repeat clients who were just like, what the heck is going on? So kind of at the end of the summer, last summer, we knew that we needed to really kind of do some damage control from what happened the previous summer. So we looked a little farther ahead than we likely would have normally to know what we were facing coming into this summer. But typically it would be during that season, the previous season. So during the winter months, we were looking into summer. And like right now, we're thinking about winter rates. So it's usually the season prior that we're looking ahead.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Awesome. Would anyone else like to share kind of like how they've been reacting to kind of demand and pacing this summer?
Yeah, so as I said, we had specials earlier before starting the season. May is pretty much like just not really a month that we push, but we try to do that. The airport was closed and we tried to get some front range business, but it was still low and we did budget for that. I guess our success has not only been for rates, but has been losing a little bit the minimums, the restrictions. So as we had a good amount of on the books, then we target to really fill those gaps and lower those minimums earlier this season that last season. So that we have been able to, fill more gaps during the weekdays. Additionally, Aspen is behaves very different during the summer. For us, monthly stays are big during the summer, and we did really good in capturing monthly stays earlier in the season or before starting the season, and then try to fill those gaps between monthly stays was very successful. And now at the end, of course, like approaching 15 days or 20 days earlier, then we check, okay, what do we need to fill? And we try to put our most competitive rate there to try to get extra bookings, even direct or through OTAs.
That makes sense. So what I heard there, which I think are all pretty solid, is bolstering your kind of your summer in particular with those kind of monthly stays. So that's in a revenue management sense, what if you listen to some of the professional revenue managers, they'll call building a base of business, right? Building an occupancy base that's maybe at a more conservative rate position or like offering to make it so that you have less risk when you actually get into the window and especially into the last minute. So using those long terms to build a base of business, great kind of strategy to focus on. I also heard you mention you're doing some promotions, but a big one was that you also started adjusting your minimum length of stay restrictions earlier, so that you could both fill gaps but also kind of offer the product. Does that sound about right?
Correct.
And you mentioned really making sure your rate was in line in the kind of like 15 to 20 day window, which I think is good. When were you making adjustments to your minimum length of stay?
Oh, I think I start in April. Like,
April, so really.
Yeah. Um, we have been in the past very restrictive about minimums just because for both winter and summer, we give priority to longer stays. And after that, then we try to fill everything. like in the last 30 days, to change those minimums. But especially seeing the trend and hearing from like all type of resources that stays are shortening. We also receive quotes like, okay, I just want to stay 4 nights instead of like 7 nights that we have. So we also try to be flexible when we receive direct requests on like, okay, like is this week very busy, or can we lower here? Can we make an exception? So I think just really talk to your team, to what they are seeing also with the market. Then we start lowering those minimums, especially we start with like, that inventory that we know is like hardest to rent. And then, so giving priority there, and then we move with the same strategy to other units that are like well located and that we need to fill those gaps.
Yeah. I think there's a few kind of national trends right now that are pretty interesting, and I think they're important to be paying attention to. One of them in particular is the erosion of minimum length of stay. Um, Essentially across the country, this is happening at different levels, but like the longer stays are just not coming through the way they used to. And this is probably from a number of things. One of them is since COVID, there's been large influx of supply and in most markets across the country. So that makes things more competitive. Part of it is probably consumer. As travelers, the primary family traveler is a millennial. The younger traveler, is Gen Z. They seem to be much more interested in a little shorter trip. Like I'm a millennial. I don't think I've ever booked a 7 night trip. I've only ever booked longer or shorter. Um, and though a lot of the like revenue management advice we give to people, especially if they're coming from situations where they have strong restrictions, is one, validate that the restrictions make sense. It does make sense to put restrictions on a property if you're able to book it, right? Or if it's far enough out that you're not trying to worry about it. But if you have properties that have, struggle in performance, or you have seasons that struggle to perform, drop those minimum length of stays on those and see if you can get a higher overall occupancy by offering the shorter stay. You may want to pair that with like, especially, whether you're using a dynamic pricing system or setting the price yourself, you may want to shift some of the pricing. One of the big things is weekly stays make a lot of sense for flat rate because you're making them take the whole week. Once you start shifting to a shorter stay, especially further out in the booking window, you do want to shift some of that money from the weekdays into the weekend because people are probably less likely to book the weekdays on their own. But pretty much across the country, we're seeing people having to pull off their minimum length of stay restrictions. Some of the areas like Florida, where this has actually been happening for years, they have been getting more and more competitive. There's a lot of listings, there's a lot of competition, and that kind of like battle for the consumer has resulted in, basically 4 years ago, a bunch of people were doing Saturday to Saturday. Now almost nobody's doing it in the Panhandle. We're starting to see that shift up the East Coast this year. And I imagine we'll kind of see it everywhere. That the shorter length of stay is kind of the norm. Along with that, we're also seeing options from the PMSs to actually make it easier to price different length of stays. So hopefully we'll see more of that. But it seems like a pretty common trend. Is anyone else holding longer length of stays? And when do you generally like think to kind of pull those off?
We've adjusted our minimum night stays as well, slightly, and especially during peak seasons here when we have food and wine, we have a minimum like stay that we don't really adjust just because it's such a high demand time. But we'll go in, and if we have, if there's a gap, we try to do a lot with our gap bookings and our PMS too, and we are pretty successful in that. If there's like a 4 night minimum or whatever, but there's a 3 night gap, we'll just switch that like
Mhm.
in the moment. So I'll look ahead a few months in advance. And if there's, we don't do anything typically less than 3 nights because it's a board policy, and It's just difficult for, housekeeping and just logistics. But we try to keep an eye on gap bookings as often as possible. And we have talked about, we've adjusted kind of going into the summer again, kind of foreseeing what was coming down the pipeline, adjusting some of those minimum night stays so it was a little friendlier. And the other thing that we do too is for our repeat guests, when we fill in like the longer bookings before we actually open the books for the public.
Mhm.
Well, for everybody else, we will do, depending on how long they stay, is the discount that they get. So we try to do a lot with the minimum night stays to try to make it appealing for both sides, I guess you could say too. So we
Yeah.
try to keep up with it often though, really just looking in our PMS and where can we fill gap bookings, because a lot of those will come in, a lot of those little gap bookings will come in from like Verbo or booking.com that are sort of just last minute, sweet, I'm coming for 3 nights and here we go, so it's certainly helpful to do that for us.
Yeah, I definitely usually suggest to most people from a strategy perspective, no matter where they are, that whatever your short-term booking window is, I'm going to make this not disappear for a second. Whatever your short-term booking window is, that you drop your whatever your kind of like desired length of stay, you drop that in the shortest booking window, right? And you should probably do it a little bit earlier than when you would drop the rate, because I think that holding a restriction and higher rate, you can sometimes drop the restriction first before you drop the rate, and you'll be in pretty decent shape. Um, and whatever this like short-term window is probably going to be different depending on the season. Like that short-term window here, that might only be a week or 2 weeks, right? Because there's so much demand. But here, in low season, it might be 45 days in advance. You're just like, hey, just let people book if they want to book, right? And being able to kind of break up when you make those strategies, I think is going to be really, really useful. One other thing I've wondered is when you guys hold a longer length of stay, are you talking like 5 nights? Or are you talking like 7 nights?
For us, it depends on the season, and it depends on the time. During like Christmas, we don't do anything less than 7 nights, typically, unless there's a gap booking, and then we have the authority with the board to reduce to fill gap bookings.
Mhm.
But for us, it just depends. Through the summer, we did a minimum of 3 nights, just because, again, kind of looking into what's going on, trying to stay on top of it. So for us, it just depends on the season, and if there's something like food and wine, then it's a higher length of stay as well. So it depends on the season, but a week we don't do anything more than a week, or 7 nights, but
Oh, interesting.
um, yeah.
Yeah, I've always wondered if like because so it doesn't seem to be as big of a deal here, the 7 night thing, but I like there's a lot of people in the southeast that hold 7 nights, and I've always wondered if they should just change that to 6 if they're going to hold it. You know, it's hard to extrapolate off of my own behavior. I don't know that I'm a regular consumer, but I think I have never ever booked a 7 night stay anywhere. I always need like one day to get home before I have to go back to work. You know.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
Um, okay, so one other data point I wanted to just take a look at here is it's going to be this asking rate one. I think asking rates are kind of interesting because the occupancy gives us a good context of just like generally how demand is. And right now it's down. We're seeing that validated by the chamber that just overall room nights are down. That means it's more competitive. Asking rates are going to give us an idea of what the market is doing in the short-term rental space, because asking rates are going to be the averages of how people are pricing, particularly on the OTAs, but we do get a lot of direct data as well. And so we can kind of see the behavior of what's happening in the supply itself. And the most interesting thing here for me is you guys are really bucking the trend compared to a lot of markets that I've looked at. I mean, we've been doing this all year, and for the most part, averages across the market are down a bit in almost every month. Which means people are responding to the fact that the market's under pressure, right? Which is pretty interesting to me because honestly, the short-term rental space in particular tends to not be very responsive and holds rates really high. When I look at this with most Southeast markets, they're down 10-15% in occupancy at the market level, but what the market is doing is trying to push rates 5 to 10%. And it's like they're not responding well. You guys are responding to the fact that occupancy is down. It seems like you may be missing, because you have a lot of like kind of a lot of different products, so you might be missing some of your highest end stuff, particularly if it's coming off of rental. I do think the most interesting thing is here. You can see that after about July, things stabilize a little bit here. I would expect it to be, higher out here, but some of those reductions kind of disappear. And there's a hunch that I have, which is there's a tendency in our space to really only look out like 30 or 60 days. If you have large properties, people obviously look out much further, but the industry has a trend of like only really doing revenue management in a pretty short window, and then kind of holding premiums further out. And part of that makes sense, right? Like, you guys are busy as property managers. It's hard to pay attention to 365 days a year all the time. But one of the revenue management suggestions that I do make for people is, when you decide how much time you're going to spend on revenue management, in some cases, that short window, it takes the most amount of revenue management time for people. They budget the most for it, but it's actually the place where you can kind of do the least, right? The answer is pretty simple in the short window. You're either going to drop the rate or drop the restrictions, and you're trying to get heads in beds. So you can do a lot less, just decide how much you cut the rate, implement that, decide when you drop your restrictions, implement that, and then use the extra time to think out another season. Because even though this stuff here is a lower season, there's still occupancy to be captured. And when we look at the pricing, the market's not really responding yet the same way that they're responding in the like how they've responded in the past, and how they're responding like into the next 30 days. So sometimes all you have to do is make some adjustments to try to take the market share. In a market under pressure, I like to think of like you're trying to take the market share and capture the consumer whenever they're looking. There are going to be people looking out here. Now, we did look at the pace for September, pretty low, only 8% on the books at this time last year. So there's not a ton, but for your
John?
portfolio, yes.
John, I'm sorry, I joined late. This is Alexandra. I'm based down in Carbondale. Now, my September and October are totally full. I've got the people who come for the colors at that time. It's not a low occupancy or a low rate per night time for me. So,
Well,
is this information Aspen?
Yeah, this is at the whole market level. And so
Whole market, or is it Aspen?
sorry, what was that?
Is this information that you have here specifically related to Aspen, the Roaring Fork Rally, or is this general information?
We're
Data.
looking at the whole kind of Aspen Snowmass area.
Okay.
And
I'm
the other thing to
surprised
keep in
it's that
mind,
low.
I mean, it's not super low. It's like when we look at this, September is not here and it's not here. So it's like what I would call a solid shoulder, which means, occupancy is still coming off of this summer high, but it's a little lower. It's a little lower than, say, the winter, but it's not a low season. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that like you want to make sure that you look out a little further, because if most people are focusing on the summer, it's actually a good time to start to focus on this September, October, definitely August time period, and try to take the market share. Now, as part of revenue management too, you always want to compare what you're seeing at the market level to what you're doing. Because if you're fully booked right now, that may indicate a few things. One, it may indicate you have a really solid like business line. Maybe you do a lot of like return guests. A lot of people on this call have said they really focus on return guests and get their pacing up ahead so that they don't have to compete with everyone who's just doing like whatever is on the OTAs at the last minute. It may also mean that you're potentially underpricing the product a little bit because you're selling everything. I don't know how big your portfolio is.
It's very small, and
Yeah.
my return people, I'm all return guests.
that's the other thing too, is that like the size of your portfolio is going to be very different, right? Um,
Mhm.
a smaller portfolio, you, you know, you the amount that you need to be fully booked is going to be very different than if you have like hundreds of units in an area,
Yeah.
or even, 100 or 50. That's all going to change, but it does kind of indicate to you. So right here, the market will be fairly occupied for this time period. But right now it's pretty low occupancy. So you've pretty much captured a lot of the guests that are coming, potentially. Now, that could indicate to you that you could maybe raise your rate. Um, the other thing too is there's a strategy piece here. You could just make the decision that you like the stability. You're happy with how much you're making at this time. That's totally fine as well. We do see that the market keeps falling a little short across the entire area, for the last multiple months. So from a strategy perspective, you might be totally fine with that. But for those people who aren't quite looking out that far, and I think at the market level, that's kind of evident in these asking rates, you don't see the same kind of responsiveness to the rate position once we get into August and beyond. It's still there a little bit, but not quite the same. So my hunch here is that this will shift over if we look at this in 30 days, that these rates will start to come down, that sort of thing. For you, if you're looking to make up any loss of occupancy, or you're just concerned that the market's going to get worse, if you haven't been paying attention to this time period, it's probably a good time to pay attention because there is occupancy to capture here. And you're not yet competing with everyone because, it's not the peak booking window. That makes sense, Alexandra?
Yeah. And I wasn't sure if I should speak up as I'm so small and I'm down in Carbondale.
Oh, please always speak up. That's why we're doing this. So we're kind of getting towards the end here. One quick question I have for you guys is, when do you start to pay attention for the winter? When do you start to really be like, what's the time periods that you're hitting to pay attention to your winter booking window?
On our level, we are already looking at it. We definitely are seeing a lower demand with everything that is going. But the question is when to react, right? At this point, we have adjust rates. We definitely have a more strong strategy considering current conditions. We have softened those rates in there. Plus, we have softened some minimums as well in those periods where we know lower demand is a trend. Plus, we are trying to capture some groups to fill some of those periods where we are not so strong in occupancy. But at this point, we pretty much are waiting and see, how it shapes. We are getting closer to one of our busiest times for booking window. And we already have promotions out there. But so far that is what we are doing.
Yeah, so you're already watching it pretty closely. You're making a few smaller movements, kind of in response to your own pacing. I think that makes sense. Would anyone else like to share kind of when they start looking for the summer, when they're going to be most concerned about that kind of pacing in their own portfolio? Nope. One of the things I always advise when I'm working with clients on revenue management is to almost always look out a season further than people have been looking. I would say that like there's a few ways that you can decide when you want to look. For you, what I pulled up here is some lead time distribution for February. And so that's like a peak time period. We can kind of get an idea. Now, take this with a grain of salt because I'm looking at all properties in the market, including all bedroom counts. You really do need to tailor any booking window information to the specific bedroom count you're going to look at. But you can also look at this in your own data. And there's a few things that I like to kind of look at. One of them is I like to find where the median is, where the median booking window is. And usually in my mind, the median booking window is like, that's going to be like the peak time. That means if you're just starting to look at that time, you're probably a little too late. you really need to be on pace with where you need to be. Like your pacing needs to be, you need to be satisfied with your pace when you're in the median booking window, right? In this case, at the market level for February, it's about 40 to 45 days, which is actually a lot further than you see in a lot of markets when you include like one bedrooms and condos. So people are looking out further here. That means like, and this will, I think, will make sense. If you're in February, when you're towards the end of December, beginning of January, you need to be like pacing, you need to be making the bookings you're trying to make. The other data point I look for is when about 20% of the reservations are on the books. So this one's 60 to 65 days. And keep in mind, this includes one bedrooms. So that means wherever that kind of like the first 20% of your reservations, 15 to 20% are on the books, that's like a great data point to be like, put it on my Google Calendar. This is really when I need to start paying attention to this. It's like, it needs to be, this is when I start looking at this on a weekly basis and really have my eye on the ball. Sometimes I even will recommend like, so if you have bigger homes, this will shift even further out, right? But those are two heuristics that I use to kind of like get an idea of when to start looking. My hunch for really paying attention to, from a like revenue management perspective, really paying attention to the winter kind of bookings is to kind of do what Gina said, which is to lightly be tracking it here and making small moves. And then probably once you get into this September, October period, to really make that a focus of the revenue management time that you're spending without maybe losing an eye on just driving as much occupancy as you can here. I don't know how well that matches with what you guys are thinking. Obviously, booking window stuff is complicated. You got to kind of look at your own data and compare it to the market. But the trend that I was just kind of seeing on those booking window things is it is further out, right? Than you might see in like a Florida market where that average booking window is 20 days, right? Even in a high season or 30 days, which is pretty interesting. Okay, guys. I think that's what I got for you today. Couple things that I just want to bring up before I hop. Just a reminder, market data in these kind of market overviews are free. So you can access this. You don't have to be a Wheelhouse customer. We do have a data platform. It's partially free, partially paid, that allows you to get into a little bit more specific area. So if you go to this sets, you could actually build a market report for just a specific area. So rather than looking at all of Aspen Snowmass, you could just look at the one area that your listings are in, like you were mentioning, Alexandra. I don't recall what area you said you were in.
Carbondale, which is down valley from Aspen, about 20 miles. Caran, Carbondale.
Yeah.
Colorado.
Is this it?
Yep.
Yep. So you could actually build a market report using this platform specifically for the listings in that area. One other thing I like to mention too, and if you'd like to test that out, just shoot us an email. We're happy to give you some free access for a while. One other thing I like to bring up is I talk a lot about pace when I do this kind of market data. It's really important to know the market's pacing because you're going to compare that, but you're comparing it to your own pace, right? Because if you're pacing really well and the market's pacing poorly, that's going to tell you something different than if you're pacing poorly and the market's pacing really well, right? And so if you have a hard time really visualizing your pace or getting really easy access to your pace data, Wheelhouse does have a business intelligence platform that is also free. So if you link your account, you don't have to be a Wheelhouse pricing customer, but you can access all of our business intelligence to show you how you're pacing, what days are selling, what days are not selling. You can compare this to where you were as of the same time last year. And it's a very easy way to see how your listings are doing and bring that down to a specific daily level. So you could see if like, hey, maybe the month of September looks fine, but you're actually pacing behind in the middle of September, but you're pacing ahead at the end of September. We're happy to provide you access to this. If you need some help, just let us know. We also do provide training on how to use it, including training on some processes so that, if you have limited time for revenue management, but you just wanted to touch it an hour a week, we can give you some processes to help you keep in touch with your portfolio overall and also your different groups of properties and most important listings. So let us know if you'd like access to that. Try not to do too much product stuff on this because it's mostly about the data. But yeah.
Yeah, and as you probably know, I am within Habit, and we're having an event in the Aspen area on August the 7th. And if anybody would like to join us, they're very welcome.
Awesome. Well, appreciate all your guys' time today. If you have any questions or want to ask me something specific, please feel free to email me. And otherwise, I appreciate your time.
Thank you,
Thank you very
John.
much.
Appreciate you.
Have a
Thank
good
you
one.
very much.
On YouTube.